This is Gemara Horayos, Daf Ches, and we are actually closing in on this Masechta, but maybe even grander. So we're closing in on Seder Nizikin. What an accomplishment, B'siyata Dishmaya. All the learning of this month has been generously sponsored by a close friend of the Daf, as a Schos Aliyas Lishama for his mother, Esther Reyzel, Basra Meir, B'siyata Dishmaya. The incredible Kayach HaTayra should elevate the Neshama of Esther Reyzel, Basra Meir, to higher and higher in Gan Eden Shel Maila. We're holding on the last narrow line of Zaynim and Beis. Says the Gemara, quoting the Mishnah, "V'loi ba'avodas kochavim, ella al halam davar im shigyas ma'isa." And Bezdin is not chayiv in the case of a dezara, again, unless similar to that which we saw by the Kain Mashuach, unless similar there is a helam davar with a shagig. Ask the Gemara, Min Allah, the Tanu Rabbanan teaches the Gemara, from the fact that Avodah Zarah was singled out, to be judged by itself. I would think you would think you're chayav for pure shoygig. Says the Gemara, no. From the fact that it says me'enei by the paralam davar shel tzibor, the fact that it says me'enei by avodas kachavim, we know that just like paralam davar shel tzibor is only with helam davar shegas ma'isa. Av kind of helam davar shegas ma'isa. Ask the Gemara, vil Mashiach be'avodas kachavim like a tani. When you go through all the permutations, the one case that is not listed is the kain Mashiach. In a case of avodah zara by avodas kachavim, says the Gemara, Masni said Mani, Rebbe, Teitani, we learned in a Brayso, Mishev Chavim. If the Kohen Mashuach errs in a case of avodah zara, Rebbe Oimer V'Shegas Ma'isa, V'Chachamim Oimrim, Tish Chachamim Oimrim Behelem Davar. The pasuk said, the Chachamim say, no, it's not b'shoygig, but rather it is behelem together with the shogig. But vishavim, both Revi and the Chacham agree. Shebesira, they agree regarding the din of the seira of shavin. Shemivim asham taloi, that there's no din of an asham taloi. So regarding the Mashiach b'avodas kachavim, it's not listed in the Mishnah because we're going with Shitas Rebbe that you only need a shogig, no helem, but the Chachamim disagree. But they agree with regard to the Sa'ir, in regard to the fact that there's no Asham Talui. Says the Gemara, really? V'tizbra, v'zidainai, kares, v'shagasai, chatos. Ask the Gemara, when we come to this Avodah Zara, this Avera Avodah Zara, the only case is going to be if it was v'zadain, then it'll have a kares, and v'shagi will have a chatos. But Mikatani asked the Gemara, does the Mishnah say that this halacha applies to the Kohen Mashuach? Says the Gemara, Elatani ha. But yet, even though the Mishnah does not say it, yet, Huadin laha, it says one case, and we know it applies there also. Meaning, the Gemara was being medayek from the fact that the Mishnah did not list the case of the Kohen Mashuach with the Zara. Says the Gemara, no diuk, because just like we find by the case of the Kohen Mashuach with the, just like we find the case by, Zada and Karis Shigas Chatas wasn't listed, and yet it's included, so too here. So says the Gemara, so now let's just go back. My time with the Rebbe, where did the Rebbe get his din from? Amar Kra, Chibar HaKoyen, Ala nefesh hashogegas bechata b'shkaga. From here we learn out nefesh ze Mashiach, hashogegas ze nasi, bechata b'shkaga. Rebbe Yisavar, how do you darshan those two words? Chet ze b'shkaga yehi. For Rabbanan Savri, no. Mi shechat asay b'shkaga. Yotza Mashiach shein chatas b'shkaga ella be'elam davar. And that's what the Chachamim get, that you need both helem and shoyeg v'shavin. They both agree. Shebesira ki yachid. They both agree with regarding the halacha of the sa'ir, the female goat that's brought forth this Aveda for the Zara, they both agree that as the same did as a Yachid. Minalan, where do they know that from? Damar Cross says the Torah, the Nefesh Achas. And from there we darshin echad yachid v'echad nasi v'echad mashiach kulam bechlal nefesh achas, and they all have a din of one nefesh, and they'll all be chayiv the same carbon. We turn over to Chesam and Aleph, and we dive into the next segment of the brisa that was just quoted. The brisa said v'shavim, that both Rebbe and the Chacham agree shemi ashatali. Asked the Gemara minalan, from where is this halacha known? It says in the pasuk v'chibar lav hakayin, and the kayin will get a kapara al shigasay asher shagag. Rebbe savar mishe kol chetoi bishkaga. Yotza says this is excluded. She'ein kol chetoi bishkaga ela belam davar. Midi says the Gemara. 1 second. It said v'chibar alav hakayin, and you're darshaning kol. Midi kol ksiv. Says the Gemara, guess what? Yes, Dim Kain. You know why? Because if it should have said Nechtav al Shigasai, Lamer li Asher Shagag, what is the 2 words? Kamash teaches us the Ad Deika Kol Chetoi Bishkaga. Instead of al Shigasai, instead of Asher Shagag, shows it has to be complete Shogig. And this is Yatzah Mashiach Shekol Chetoi Bishkaga Ela V'Riz Chavim. V'Lei B'Shar Mitzvahs Ela Belam Davrim Shigas Ma'isa. That's how Rebbe's going to learn. V'Rabbanan, Mishchatei Bishkaga, Yatzah Mashiach, Shein Chatei Bishkaga, V'lei B'Vadaz Chavim, V'lei B'Shar Mitzvahs, Elo Al Hel Davar, in Shigas Ma'isa, and those are the Mekayres for Shitas Rabbi, Shitas the Chachamim of this Brisa. Now we continue with another Mishnah, and in thematic of this parak, which is all the halachas of the Kohen Mashuach, and the comparison and the contrasting them to the din of Paral and Davar Shal Tzibur and other dinim of the Bezdin, says the Mishnah. The Mishnah, about 15 lines down, Chesam and Aleph, says the Mishnah, Ein Bezdin Chayavim at Sheyoyre B'Davar Shal Zayin Ekar Shigas Echata, similar to what we just saw in Abba Aleph. Bezdin is not chayav for the Paral and Davar Shal Tzibur unless they paskin on a case in which it was bizadoin. If it was on purpose, it will have a kares. If it was by mistake, shoygig have a chatas. V'chein ha-Moshiach. And the same halach is going to apply by the karein Mashiach, which of course is the topic of this parak. But Leiba Avedis Chavim, says the Mishnah, the not chayv case of a dezara ad sheyoyrei al davar shezdonei kares v'shegasai chatas. Says the Gemara, minalan. Says the Gemara, from where do we know that only going to be a case of Harlem Davar Shel Tzibor if it's an Avera, that if it was done Bizadain, it would have Kares. Tanya, we learned in a Brisa. Rabbi Omer teaches, Rabbi Nemer Kan Aliyah, Nemer Halon Aliyah, Mal Halon Davar Shel Tzibor Kares Shel Chatas, Avkan Davar Shel Tzibor Kares Shel Chatas. It's Xer Shava of the word Aliyah. That was incorrect. Aleha, the word aleha, which shall be heard by Avraham Davar Shel Tzibor, and aleha, which is in the case of one being over an Isser with his achos isha, the wife's sister, and that teaches just like over there it's a southern sorry shigazachata, so too over here. Ashkechan says Gemara Tzibor, so that's like Xer Shava by aleha, by Paral Davar Shel Tzibor, by achos isha. Mashiach minalin, we know the same thing applies by Kohen Mashuach. Explains the Gemara li'ashmasam. Says the Gemara, we learn it out for the puzzle that says to the asham, to the guilt of the people. Hare Mashiach kitzibor, as we learned a few daf ago. Nasi, says the Gemara, where do we know sin dim is by a nasi? Yalav mitzvahs, ksiv gabi nasi, vasa achas kol mitzvahs Hashem. Ksiv besibar, vasa achas kol mitzvah, kol mitzvahs. Ma'ati v'davar shezanei kares shigasei chatos. Av nasi davar shezanei kares shigasei chatos. Yachid. Where do we know the same halacha applies by a yachid? Amar Cross says the pasuk v'nefesh v'yomai tachton me'elyon, and then we equate the two to each other. So that's how we learn that this carbon is only going to be for something that the zadin will be a kares and the shogeg will be a chatos. And now we go to the second half of the Mishnah, was by avodah zara. And there's no din of a carbon for the Zara ad Shayira. He said the Mishnah until it's a case again of Zadain Kares and Shigas Chata says the Gemara Be'avodas Chava Minalam. Where do we know this applies to Avodah Zara? What's the Makar? Explains the Gemara the Tana Rabban. Lefi Shiyatz Avodas Chava Latam Ba'atzma, because the Torah explains in Judges Avodah Zara by itself. Yachal I would think Yechayavim one is obligated. I feel all davar. She'in is a Dainai Kares Shigas Chatos. I would think even Chayav on a lower level. So therefore, to counteract that thought process, Nemer kan v'einei, Nemer halon me'einei. By both of them, we have the same word, and from there we learn amal halon. Davar shezdanei kares shigasei chatos. Afkan davar shezdanei kares shigasei chatos. So it's only going to be something that has the level of aveira that if done on purpose, there would be kares. Ashkechan sibur. Yochid, Nasi, Mashiach, Minol, and how do we know the other three categories? Amar Kra, Vim Nefesh, Achas, and for there we darshin, Echad Yochid, Echad Nasi, Echad Mashiach, Kulan, Bechlal, Nefesh, Achas, hey, and they all learned out from the word Nefesh, V'yilmai Tachtoin Min Ha'elyoin. Says the Gemara, Hanichad, this is all very good, Leman, Demapik Lo Le'aliyah. This is all good according to the Manda Amar. Shitas Rebbe, who says Allah is there ligzera shava kidamaran. Ella 2 lines from the bottom lirabanan de mafkilo leoleho learayis vitzarois. According to the Rabbanan, that they don't use this gzera shava for us, but rather the gzera shava of Allah is used for arayis. It's used for the dinim of tzarais co-wives. So then, where do you know this din from? Explains the Gemara, we have a different mikar. So everything we just said only fits according to Shitas Rabbi. But according to the Chachamim, what are we going to say on the first wide line? As Rabbi Shua ben Levi taught his son, from this pasuk it says, for any the halach of the Torah. Person who acts biyad rama with a high hand. This is talking about one who does avodah zara v'gaimer. From here we are hekish kol haTorah kula levetz chavim. We have a equation. We have the comparison to kol haTorah kula to avodah zara. Ma'avedas chavim shechayavin al sedainai kares v'ashigasei chatos avkan shechavin al sedainai kares. So to over here, we'd be chayiv only if it's a level of aveir that when bezadain would have a kares and b'shoy would have a chatas. So ashchan yachin nasi mashiach bein b'avodas chavim bein b'shar mitzvahs. We found all of those in Makar, but Sibar Minola, now we flip it around and ask the Gemara, where do we know that the din of lies by Tzibur, the same halach as we davar shezadin kares shigasei chatas yalaf elyon mitachtoin. We learned the previous psukim which talk about avodah zara, from the end psukim which talk about avodah zara on the Tzibur level, to the end psukim it talks about avodah zara on the personal level. So that's all going to be according to the Rabbanan. The Rebbe, so now the Gemara throws the ball back. According to Rebbe, Rabbi Shua ben Levi, what does he do with the drasha of Torah Achas Yelachem that Rabbi Shua ben Levi just learned? Ma'apik leilech the Tanya, says the Gemara, we lose it for the following brisa. Once we find that the Torah separates and distinguishes between a Rabbim and a Yachid, once we know that there's a chilek in halacha by avodah zara between the two, that what Rabbi Besayev u'mimayna navad, that when the tzibur worships avodah zara, the halacha is the misas Besayev, beheading with a sword, and their mamayin is destroyed. Yechidim beskila, whereas if it's a singular person, it's skila mamayin palat, and their money is saved. So yachal nach like the carbon. So once we find one differentiation, you would think we should have another differentiation. Therefore, that is what Rebbe does with that drasha. But asks Rebbe Chalkiya, time Seemingly, what's the reason that the psukim, the karbanis, what's the reason that we do not separate between the karbanis of a tzibur and a yachid is because the cholak hakasach, meaning the hava mina. Ho cholak hava mina nachlaik, my naisi. But ask the Gemara, in what way would you be able to separate the halachas about a rabbi and bring you a carbon? Naisi par, tzibur b'shar mitzvah sudamaisi. But tzibur already brings such. Naisi par lo'ila v'sar lachata tzibur zchavu damaisi. Naisi soyer nasi b'shar mitzvah sudamaisi. Naisi siris yachin nami hainu carbonoi. So ask the Gemara, what was the hava mina? You're telling me that according to Rabbi, you need Torah achas yilachem to teach us that it's not that it is not like b'karbanei seyem. What would the hava mina be? Excuse me, that it's not like b'karbanei seyem. What would the hava mina be? Says the Gemara, Yitzchak, I'll tell you. Salgadei dechamina sibur ma'isi par lo'ila v'soyer lachat sani na'isi ibcha. So we would think that if a tzibur should be the opposite, bar lachat sar lo'ila inami tzarich vein lo tekana, or maybe there would be a unique halacha that a tzibur that's over such halacha tzarich needs to bring a carbon, but they can't. Kamash malons. That's what, according to Rebbe, we have the pasuk of Zerachas Yilachem Klape, a tzibur worshiping of a zara, that they're all going to bring a regular chatas, just like one who does an avera on their own. Says the Gemara, based on that which we said, the Kuli Alma, 5 lines to the bottom. Kuli Alma Miyas, according to everyone. Kikatani Ani Krai, when we have these psukim, Bavid Eschavim Udechsivi, they're written by the Zara. My mashma, how do you know that Amarava Vitem Rav Yeshua ben Levi V'Amr Kadi? Some say it was Kadi, that's his name. Amar Kavit Chisishku V'Loisasu. And he's called a mitzvah. He say Le'ezei mitzvah. What is a mitzvah? Shishkul Kechol mitzvah that's equal to all the mitzvahs. Havi Omer says the Gemara Zu Avodas Gochavim is Avodas Zara 1 teres. Ve'Rebbi Tana Amar Kra Asher Dibar Hashem El Moshe. What's a mitzvah? The dibur was via Hashem, but the tzivah was via Moshe. Where do we have the makar? Excuse me. Titani Rabbi Yishmael anoichiv la'yelecha mipi agura shamanan. And number 3 makar is via Yishmael Tana, as we turn over to Chesam Abayz, wrapping up this second half of the shir, the second Mishnah. He learns it, says Rabbi Yishmael, we learn it from a different pasuk. On the top line of Ches, Amid Aleph, we learn it from Limin Hayomer Shetiva Hashem V'Hala L'Dayrei Seichem. Ezi mitzvah shinamra b'tchila, V'Yomer Zuva Zchavim. I asked the Gemara, V'Amar, Eser mitzvahs Nisav Yisrael b'Mara. 10 mitzvahs they were commanded in Mara, T'chsev Hayim Shemot Tishma Tishma L'Kol Shem L'Kecha. Says the Gemara, either of the first 2 Tirutzim. With that, we go on to the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, based off the previous discussion, that we said there's only going to be a chiyuv when it's something that the Zadin would get kares and the Shagig would get a chatas. Says the Gemara, let's go to the next step. Ein chayavin ala seiv aloisa seishav mikdash. Says the Mishnah, a bezdin is not chayiv a paralim zavar shel tzibor for an avera and asay or a loisa asay with regarding the Beis Hamikdash, which means Tomas Mikdash, as the Mefarish explains on this side. Ve'ein mevi an ashav talui ala asay v'aloisa asay shav mikdash. Aval, however, chayavin ala asay v'aloisa shav nida. However, there is an obligation of the bezdin. Paralim zavar shel tzibur for the avera and asay or loisa with regarding to nida, and v'mashal ala asay v'aloisa asay shav nida. So it's not with regarding to Tomas Mikdash, but yes, with regarding to Nida. Ezi mitzvah say Nida. What is a mitzvah say with regard to Nida? Purush min Nida is the mitzvah of separation from a Nida. Mitzvah losa says al tava min adidu. We have an asay and a losa say klabi the halachas of a Nida that one has to refrain, that there is a halach of his heart to mention that whether it's on the Yom Oina, as we'll see, whether it's on when there's actual nidas, the chiyuvim of pre-shav separation between husband and wife. Says the Gemara, let's take the Mishnah piece by piece. The first half of the Mishnah, that there's no chiyuv for I say in Lois Session of Mikdash Minan immediately the Tzibur Lamachayvi Karban Ba'alma V'Yachad Asham Toli Nami Loi. We know that Tzibur does not bring any Yachad, not bring on Thomas Mikdash V'Kadashav. Amar V'Zabarav Dimi Nemar V'Asham B'Chatas V'Asham Toloi V'Nemar V'Ashmai B'Tzibur Mai V'Asham V'Yachad B'Chatas Kavua Af V'Ashmai B'Tzibur B'Chatas Kavua Uma Tzibur B'Chatas Kavua Af Asham Toli Nami Ein Ba Ella Al Safek Chatas Kavua. It's only going to be with the Savik of a Chatas Kavua, but not for Thomas Mikdash V'Kadashav, which would be because of the Chiyav of a Karban, because of the Asham Toli. So Amri says more 1 second. Karban Aylavi Nami. The same halacha should apply. So all should only apply for a Chatas Vadai. Says more than Asham in Ashmai than Asham in Ye'esham. It's a different word. Omai nafkamino. Says the Gemara, what's the difference? Why is such a minor difference cause for not making Gzeir Shav, a very famous Gemara? I asked the Gemara about Yishmael famously has a Josh of a Sheva Koinu Ba'akain, and he darshins Zui Shiva Zui Bia, that he makes Gzeir Shav, even though the word V'Sheva and Uba are similar enough. So why by us do we not for Yesham and Asham? And furthermore, Nel min V'Asham mitumas Mikdash U'Kedashav l'Chsev Utame V'Asham. So Amar Abba, Dana V'Asham u'Mitzvah Hashem and V'Asham Mitzvah Hashem. You have both parts of the pasuk. That is Rav Papa's teretz. Amrli Rav Sim Bar Ashi, they're Rav Papa, but as Rav Sim Bar Ashi, V'Nil V'Asham V'Nesias Avayin, Min V'Asham V'Nesias Avayin. So we should have a limud. Dana V'Asham u'Mitzvah Hashem. Ashaloi Asena. May V'Asham Mitzvah Hashem. Ashaloi Asena. You need 3 parts to this Gzeir Shav. And don't ask from these 3 Averais, and don't ask from the fact that there's going to be a Karbanel V'Yared with regard to Shemias, call, hearing, or Bitei Sifasayim, saying a false Shvua, Thomas Mikdash Yashav. Why? Shloinemar Behem V'Asham U'Mitzvah Hashem Ashaloi Sena doesn't have these 3 entities, and therefore will not have the Chiyuv like the rest. Stop over here. I'll pick it up from the Mishnah on the next year. B'siyata Dishmai.